I'm Mayor Jen Grigoraitis, and welcome to the Melrose Minute, where we bring you news you can use from City Hall. And I'm thrilled today to be joined by Carrie Golden, our Assistant City Auditor. Welcome, Carrie. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Mayor.
And we are here to talk about a topic that I know is always on the mind of a lot of Melrosians, the city budget.
Yes.
So could you first walk us through the budget process and timeline? I know I like to say that we're always in budget season, but there are certainly certain things that occur during different parts of the calendar.
Sure, yeah. I think I'll start at the end of the budget season. So per our city charter, we have to have the budget to the city council 45 days prior to the start of the fiscal year, which is 7/1. We run on a 7/1 to 6/30 fiscal year. So we kind of start
And just
there.
so 7/1, July 1st to
Yes,
June 30th.
July 1st, yes, sorry. Yep.
It's okay.
Yes, and so if we back up into that, typically in January, we send out budgetary requests to departments where we ask them to put together a level service budget request. And what that means is like keeping the same level of service, but accounting for all the costs that are increasing in that budget. So typically that's completed late January, early February, and it's submitted to the finance team. And we take that information and review it against collective bargaining agreements or other contracts in place. And we put it all together, and then we get to March. And so in March, we start meeting with the mayor's team and the department heads so they can start talking through that process and kind of what, you know, their needs are in the department or asks. And then by the end of March, we try to arrive at a final budget number so we can start our presentation of the budget. And that takes some time to put together all the supporting documents. So we aim to have the budget complete by mid-April. So then we can get it to the city council. We aim for the first Monday in May so that there's a little bit of flexibility on the end and we're not bumping up right against that June 30th timeline. So once the budget is submitted to the council, usually there's a special meeting that Monday where both school committee and the city council are there to accept the budget. And then the city council begins their process where they have the department heads come in front of them and kind of hear their ask or what's going on in their department, new programs. And once all the departments go through, then we hope that we have a budget passed by June 30th. So
That is the hope, and
Yes.
also the requirement under state law that we have a balanced budget by June 30th. So unlike some other branches of government above us, we are required to have a balanced budget by June 30th. And I know
That's
that
right.
takes a lot of work to get us there.
yes.
You mentioned costs, and I'm assuming anyone who's opened one of their own invoices at home or gone out to buy food or clothing has noticed that things that cost a little less last year cost more this year to get the same thing, and the city is not immune to that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the major costs that make up the city budget?
Sure, yeah. So, just like everyone at home, we had to negotiate new utility rates last year. So, we're not immune to that. Our salaries, that's the largest part of our budget. I think, 90% of our budget is made up of both salary and benefit cost. And this year, we're projected to have a 9.6% increase in health insurance, which is significant. We have about 750 benefit eligible employees. So that 9.6 increase is very impactful. We have our debt obligations that we can't, we have to pay those debt obligations. That helps with our bond rating. And so we need to make sure that we're paying the bonds. And then the retirement board, they vote the retirement appropriation every year. So we can, we have a pension obligation that we're projected to fund by 2039. But that's voted by the retirement board annually. And obviously education. I mean, one of the things that hurt significantly was last year, the tuition for special ed and transportation, we saw 14% increases.
Right, and we had to respond to those, whereas our revenue doesn't necessarily go up by 14% every year. So can you talk a little bit, so we've talked about the cost side of the budget, and you've mentioned really important things like our obligation as an employer to compensate people fairly, to make sure that they have benefits, and we don't really control the cost of those going up. Can you talk about what we see on the revenue side coming into the city?
Sure, yeah. So about 72% of our revenue comes in through property tax, which is obviously governed by Prop 2.5. So with that, that results in about $1.8 million on the tax levy. And then we project $500,000 worth of new growth in the city annually. And that's based on like an estimate of a number of years. We have state aid. So in FY24, we got $2.5 million in Chapter 70. We did not see increases like that. For FY25, it was a maintenance of that. And so state aid makes up about 18%. And so what we're seeing is a net increase of 1.86% in state aid. Our local receipts, which are considered, there's some that are more volatile than other local receipts. That's your motor vehicle excise, your meals tax, your interest rate or interest payments, not interest payments, interest that you receive, and building permits. And so if people are going to scale back, if that's where they scale back, you see fluctuations in those because people may not buy a new car if the economy is not doing well, go out to dinner as much, do that home renovation. So that makes up about 7% of the budget. And then the remaining 3% is what we call other funding sources. So those are our parking receipts, our cemetery receipts, and those have to be appropriated under state law during the budget process. And also it's chargebacks or indirect cost to our enterprise funds. So that, our enterprise funds have the employees, but then they reimburse the city for their health insurance, pension, all the cost associated with those employees. And so we see that, which makes up 3%.
And I think you've done such a great job at illustrating that there's so many pieces of the puzzle that go to fitting together our city budget. There's obviously the cost drivers, the revenue, which the bulk of that is made up from taxpayer dollars. And you referenced Prop 2.5, which is the state law that limits property tax increases to 2.5% without an approval by voters for either an override or a debt exclusion, like we just did for the public safety buildings. And that state aid is not always the savior that maybe we hope it's going to be. So I think, as you're crunching numbers for the budget this year, I think we're looking at about maybe between 2.5 to 3 million total of new additional revenue between state aid, property taxes, and an increase in new growth that's coming into the city.
Right.
And again, as you said, as everything gets more expensive to maintain, it becomes more and more expensive for us to maintain what is referred to as level services.
Right.
To just keep things exactly as they are.
Yes, exactly.
So it's a big job that you have.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the city and the schools and how those two budgets connect? I think there's often a lot of questions and maybe some confusions about the fact that obviously the schools have their own budget. They're one of the largest departments in the city, but there are also some costs associated with running the schools that are kept on the city side of the ledger.
Sure. So at some point, they tried to make the schools, they being previous administrations, tried to make the schools just focused on teaching and learning. So they pulled some of the costs to the city. And so when you see the city budget, there's an appropriation that gets voted every year by the city council. It's a one-line item. So that's just one component of the school budget. There's other funding sources that the school is able to use to balance their budget. But on the city side of the budget, we have legal. We pay for the assistant city solicitor over at the schools, Amy Lindquist. We have our IT department that provides services to the school, and they manage the capital money as part of the city budget. We have 2 student resource officers that are housed in the police department budget. I think one of the biggest things is facilities. All of the schools' custodians and utility costs, they reside in the DPW facility budget, and the maintenance contracts with custodial services and custodial supplies. Costs related to snow removal, I mean, that's incidental, but all the costs for snow removal are on the city side of the ledger. Health insurance and all the benefit costs, they reside in our HR department's budgets. And then we have the health department. That's also a big ticket item where we house all of the school nurses in the health department budget. And then the pension obligation, there is, we have our MTRS, which is the bulk of the school, but we have the non-MTRS that are part of our pension system. And that's typically the school secretaries and paraprofessionals. And then the debt obligations as well. So we have all of the debt on the city side of the budget.
It's a lot. There's a lot to the school budget, to the city budget. I'm grateful that we have capable folks like you working so hard to keep it up and running. Before we wrap up, are there any other city budget items that you want to mention for our viewing audience?
So sure, yes. So we have a couple other budgets through the city. We have 4 enterprise budgets. And so
what's an enterprise budget?
An enterprise budget can be established under section 53F and 1/2 of Mass General Law.
Very impressive that you have that written down.
Yes. And so they can be established for specific purposes, like a utility, recreational facilities, public health. So we have a water enterprise fund, a sewer enterprise fund. We have Mount Hood, which is our golf course, and we have the ambulance enterprise fund. So those funds charge fees, and they're all self-sustaining. So all of the costs are managed within that budget. So when we present the budget annually to the city council, we send down 5 budgets. We send down the city operating budget and then these 4 enterprise budgets as well.
Wow. So we're just about out of time. I want to say thank you for being here and sharing just a little bit about a very important and complex process, and encourage those watching at home to tune in to both school committee and city council meetings as the budget process unfolds. Thank you so much. Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you.